I don't know why I love men.
The other day, I was working on a track with an artist that I like to work with. He was asking me about what bit depth and sample rate I'd be using for the track. Usually, I kind of glance over this detail. I'm really familiar with the 44.1 kilohertz sample rate and a 16-bit depth. But his question got me wondering, what other sample rates are there? What other bit depths are there? And how do they affect the audio that you're actually exporting from a track? So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing today. I'm just going to be going over what sample rate is, what bit depth is, and what settings we should be using for our DAW. Alright, so what exactly is sample rate? I think Adobe's website on sample rate is actually a very good explanation for it. Audio sampling is the process of transforming a musical source into a digital file. Digital audio recording does this by taking samples of the audio source along the sound waves at regular intervals. The more samples you take, known as the sample rate, the more closely the final digital file will resemble the original. A higher sample rate tends to deliver a better quality audio reproduction. This sounds a little bit complicated, but basically, the higher the sample rate for, let's say, recording vocals, the more accurate the actual sound waves of that file being recorded will be to the person's voice who's performing. So if my microphone had a higher sample rate, you'd be able to hear how my voice actually sounds like more accurately. It's essentially more data is stored within the audio file, giving it a higher quality. Generally, sample rates are recorded in kilohertz per second. CDs use 44.1 kilohertz per second, and that's kind of become the standard for sample rates. Alright, so now we know what sample rate is. What is bit depth? I think Fifine's website does a pretty good job at explaining what bit depth is. Bit depth, or bit rate, refers to the dynamic range in a wave of analog information. A higher bit recording is going to record more information about the sound, therefore much more accurate representation. Alright, so this sounds a little more complicated, but it's generally the same idea as bit rate, except for instead of a frequency of a sound wave being recorded, it's the actual sort of volume of it. The higher the bit depth, the more dynamic range you have in a sound file, giving it a higher quality. This allows a quieter sound to sound louder and more clear, while allowing louder songs to reach higher decibel levels. This can be useful for like loudspeakers at a concert that need to reach super high, decibel levels. Adobe actually made a really informative chart on the same website about sample rates and bit depth, exemplifying the sort of decibel scale, what's sort of generally what we hear. So, we have the faint sounds, the moderate sounds, and the loud sounds. Generally though, a bit depth of 16 is sort of the perfect number. 16 bits can reach a dynamic range of up to 96 decibels. So going any higher than 16, which would be 24-bit depth, puts a lot of unnecessary data into the audio file and can take up space or be too loud. And anything lower than 16 bits, which would be 8 bits, is pretty low quality to the point where like my DAW doesn't even have that as an option because it just can't even reach moderately loud levels of sound, so it's not really important. Its dynamic range is specifically 46 decibels, if you were wondering. A comparison that I kind of like to use, although not super accurate to sample rate and bit depth, is the image quality or the video quality of something. So 480p isn't really that high quality. That's the amount of pixels on the screen. 1080p is pretty high quality and 4K is pretty high quality. 1080p and 4K have a noticeably higher quality difference, while 44.1 kilohertz and 121 kilohertz have a less noticeable quality in sound. So, what kind of settings do we want to have on our DAW? Firstly, we can start with our sample rate. Now, there are two places where you can actually change the sample rate in your DAW. There's the input and output settings for sample rate, and then there's the exporting sample rate. Now, generally, the higher the sample rate, the higher the quality, but also the higher the latency. What I would say to go for is 44.1 kilohertz, because it still provides a really good sound. But if you think you can run it, or if you really want that higher quality sound, you can go up to 121 kilohertz, no problem, and it'll sound great. For recording vocals specifically, you'd go up in sample rate, but when making beats or mixing a track, I'd keep it at the 44.1 kilohertz. It all really depends, but good general rule of thumb is 44.1 kilohertz. Now for bitrate, however, I would definitely recommend going with 16 bits, as 24 bits can be seen as sort of overkill. The audio file actually increases by 50% when exporting things with 24-bit depth, and sometimes you don't really want to take up all that space for a quality difference you can't really hear. And yeah, that's basically it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys found it educational. I know that I was curious, and I think my questions were answered. So I think it gave me a better understanding of how sample rates really work. I know this video is pretty chill, pretty laid back. I hope we were able to get something out of it. I'm hoping to mix in some entertaining music content with some educational music content, because I want to learn and I want you guys to learn, because I find this stuff interesting. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you later.